For those of you who were not able to join us at Hamilton, Montana at the Bitterroot Board of Realtors, we had done a presentation there, and unfortunately it did not come out on film as well as we'd like to able to put it on our website. So we're reproducing this in-house, and today we're going to talk about the mountain pine beetle epidemic and how it's affecting you guys here in the Bitterroot. We got a PowerPoint presentation here that is about 30 minutes long. We're going to go over the mountain pine beetle progression in this state and surrounding states. We're going to talk about the mountain pine beetle in itself, and then we're going to talk about preventative measures and what you can do today to protect your trees. We are Timberline Tree Spraying and Fertilizing, and we are going to talk today to you about the mountain pine beetle epidemic. A little bit about us. Timberline Tree Spraying and Fertilizing was established in 2003 and has followed the mountain pine beetle epidemic through forests across the Rocky Mountain region, beginning in Grand County, Colorado. In Grand County, the National Forest Service certainly deemed that area ground zero. It has been the worst epidemic that the United States has seen in the history of the mountain pine beetle epidemic. We expanded north into Glacier National Park and as far east as the Black Hills. We are licensed in Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, and Utah, and are currently expanding into South Dakota. And our focus is to educate and provide preventative measures against the mountain pine beetle and other pests, primarily through spraying and fertilizing. In 1970, or in the 70s, the mountain pine beetle epidemic got started in Grand County and in Colorado in general, and the Rockies really suffered greatly from it. So in the mid-90s, when the Forest Service saw the epidemic start up again, they decided to really do a good job monitoring. And of all of the states out there, Colorado certainly has been able to capture a lot of the information from this last epidemic to allow homeowners such as yourself to make good decisions on their forest. You can see in 1996 there's a little bit of infestation here in the state. They indicate the growth in red, and when it hit around 2000, you'll see it really started spreading strong through the state. 2004, 2005. Watch right up here in the very top between Jackson and Larimer County. The reason I want to point this out is because I think this particular epidemic here in the Bitterroot is certainly indicative of a little bit what happened in Grand County, Colorado, which is right here. The infestation went to the north. It got up against this ridge, and you'll see here in 2005, and when I go to 2006, you see how it gets real thick right in here. It got right up against that hillside. Certainly what we're seeing here in the Bitterroot just to the west of us, where in the Idaho Selway and Bitterroot National Forest has gotten up against this range just to the west of us. Got real heavy here, but watch what happened in 2007. It spilled over that ridge. You can see it exploded on the east side, and watch in 08 and 09. I'm going to go back and forth a couple times there. There was 06, 7, 8, 9. You can see once it got over that ridge, it certainly had the opportunity to explode. The environment was good. There was plenty of host trees like you see here in the Bitterroot, and the environment was right for that explosion. In Canada, we see a little bit of the same thing. Here in Alberta, 1959 to 1998, a fairly large span of 30 years, you see the mountain pine beetle progression get to a fairly large size. But in 1999 to 2005, not so much as an adapting beetle, but just an adapting environment. The environment's been changing a little bit. You see an explosion in the population, and then from 06 to 09, again you'll see this light area, which is the Rocky Mountain Ridge. And once they got over that in 2009, they just exploded to the east side of that. And now if you were to look at a progression chart in 2011, you'll see that they've reached the jack pines over here, which is more like our lodgepole pines, a very susceptible pine tree, and they're heading east. Here in Idaho, this is a 2000 aerial survey. You'll see just south of I-90 up towards the north part of the state, the heavy dark orange infestation, and you'll see right here below the Bitterroot towards Salmon, it's dark orange. The Selway Bitterroot did not partake in the aerial survey. They did not monitor and put down what they were seeing there. But as we know from being through that and flying over it, these two dark oranges are certainly connected with heavy infestation throughout the wilderness area. In Montana, for those of you who have been over to the Lewis and Clark and Broadwater counties, You'll see the heavy infestation over there and the browning of the trees over McDonald Pass going into Helena. And you'll see right here in the Bitterroot where you guys are at, not much in 2008. And this is the latest, best map that we could show to demonstrate what's happening here. But of course here in 2011, we know that the amount of infestation that's been sitting right to the west of here has certainly made its way over the ridge to the west here and showing large signs of infestation here on your, in your valley. Pine beetle expansion in your area. 2011 Montana Forest Health Report stated Montana pine beetle is still active and continues to spread to new areas in western Montana where there is an abundance of susceptible trees, particularly in the Bitterroot Valley and the Flathead Valley. This comes from the Montana state. They do flyovers and they get a good understanding of how the beetles are expanding, and this is where they're seeing the expansion the most. In Florence, Montana, just on the west side of 93, just north of Florence, you'll see these two beautiful trees. They're about 100 feet tall. This one was just mass attacked with pine beetle on the trunk of the tree, and we went into it and inspected it, and when we saw the tree next to it, it had hits almost half to 3/4 of the way up, as far as we could see and identify. So this beautiful green tree right here is going to be all brown next year and dead. So here is a couple more. Lowell, Montana, Nez Perce Loop. These particular people had a lot of pheromone patches hung up in their trees, so they really put, and we're going to talk about pheromone patches in a minute, but they were actually doing a fairly good job trying to ward off the beetles. They hung the patches in the tree. You can see one right hanging on that tree there, but they had about a dozen trees here that were sort of mass attacked and all turning brown. Down in Darby, Long Story Lane and Tin Cup Loop, you'll see these trees, most of them about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, fairly small trees, unlike the ones in Florence that were very large trees. A lot of infestation on them. Some recent articles in the Ravalli Republic: battle rages to save western Montana forest, Bitterroot campgrounds to be sprayed with insecticide, Bitterroot National Forest sees pine beetle increase. There's certainly a lot of buzz and a lot of concern on what the beetles are doing, certainly in Montana, certainly over in Helena, and now what's happening here in the Bitterroot. So why are trees important? We were doing a survey last year, and a gentleman raised his hand and he said, how much are my trees worth? You know, what should I be investing in these trees and how much are they worth? And I really didn't know the answer to that, so when I went back to the office, I did some investigating. I started to research property values, and I tried to get my arms around what these property values would be without trees. I found this interesting equation that Purdue University put together, and it's a tree appraisal that through this equation right here, they estimated a 100-foot ponderosa pine, 35 inches in diameter, to be appraised at roughly $25,000. So when I first saw that, I said, no way, that just can't be. But when you stop and think about it, I was out at a property surveying this gentleman's trees. We walked out onto his back porch. He had two large 100-foot trees, 35 inches in diameter, and it brought to mind this appraisal because I looked at both of these big towering trees right next to his back deck, and I thought, how much would it cost to replace just one of those trees? 100 feet tall, 35 inches in diameter. And the reality of it is you couldn't do it. I mean, he thought these two trees were sacred. They were the best aesthetic value that he had to his property, and there was nothing that he wouldn't do to save them because you could not replace them. To him, they were priceless. What do trees do? They add property value. If we're not going to take care of these trees in the environment that we're in today, it costs a lot less to protect them than it does to remove them. The insurance issues that are caused when trees are around houses and dying. The effectiveness of our spray is what we're going to talk about here shortly, and the safety of it. But the trees actually give you a lot of privacy. They give you wind and noise break. They provide beauty and aesthetics. And it's really good to have good neighbors that show a good sign of stewardship towards their property. So the mountain pine beetle, Dendroctonus ponderosa. These pine beetle are actually named after the ponderosa pine. That's where they were first detected. I shouldn't say first detected, but in the early years they were detected in ponderosa. They've done a lot of devastation of ponderosa pine. They've been a little bit more successful wiping out large stands of lodgepole, so a lot of people thought they would stay there, but they actually have been in ponderosa in the past, and they're certainly here today. We're going to talk about where they came from and why they're here in epidemic proportions. We're going to talk about the flights. life cycle of the beetle, and how it kills the tree. As far as where they came from, they've been here as long as there's been a pine tree. So they've been here forever. The reason that they're here in epidemic proportion is still out for some debate, but a lot of the known things that have really allowed them to explode is the aging forest. You know, in Colorado and in Montana and Wyoming, when a forest fire breaks out, the first thing that we're doing is making a plan to put that fire out. You'll see in the 88 fires of Yellowstone where a large area of trees have burned, and there's a nice, young, healthy forest growing up there many years later. We haven't allowed that environment to take place. We see a fire, we put it out. When that takes place and we're not being good stewards of the overall forest, the forest becomes overcrowded. There's a lot of competition because trees are too close together. They become weak and sick, and they invite the beetle in. So when the beetles get there, the tree's defense mechanisms, which we're going to speak about in a moment, are so low, it allows the beetle to really reproduce in an epidemic proportion. So their lifestyle. The August is their flight time. They fly out of an attacked tree into a new host tree around August. And the different environments that we've seen, from low elevations to high elevations, and north here in Montana down to Colorado, we've certainly seen those flights being in the end of July and certainly in the first part of September. So there's a little bit more of a window than what you see here on this graph. But after the flight, they lay their egg galleries, and then they turn to larvae. They have 4 stages of larvae before they decide to winter. They winter as larvae, and that larva will stay in there all the way till May, where they start to pupate and turn back into adult. And then they emerge from an infested tree and go to a new host tree in that very late July, August time frame. So how they do it is when they fly in their flight time, July, August, September, they'll attack the tree, and the first evidence you're going to see is a pitch, what they call a pitch tube. It's a small popcorn-looking piece of resin that'll stick on the outside of the tree. That's where the tree is actually trying to defend off the beetle to push it out. The beetles in this environment are very successful in getting in, and once they do, they go horizontally and they lay those egg galleries that we spoke of. Once the eggs turn to larvae, the larvae start feeding horizontally, and what happens is just girdles the tree. This inner bark, which is the phloem, is where the vascular system of the tree is. It carries the sugars and the nutrients up and down the tree to allow that tree to survive. So it is very thin. It's about a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch thick on most trees. And you'll see once that girdling takes place, you'll see that hole is almost the entire diameter of that phloem of the tree. They cut off that vascular system, and the tree cannot survive without transporting the nutrients. The beetles also have what they call a blue stain fungus, which we'll just talk about in detail in a moment. But it's a fungus they carry on their head, and when they enter the tree, the tree takes on that fungus, and it's called blue stain, and that is identified in the sapwood of the tree. And what it does is it really restricts the water flow to allow that tree not to be able to produce resin pressure, which is what produces these pitch tubes to fend off the beetle. And then, of course, the heartwood of the tree is certainly the skeleton of the inner part of the tree. So trees attacked by mountain pine beetle, we could really sum this up as just saying pine trees. We put a small list together of what we've seen in Helena and some in this area. A lot of urban environments have Austrian pines, which are very susceptible. I know in Colorado, many of the urban environments have Scotch pines planted, and seen them really be devastated by the pine beetle. But if it's a pine beetle, if it's a pine tree, it can be devastated by the pine beetle. So the adapting pine beetle, this might not be the right word. It might not be adapting. I don't know if the beetles have really given us proof that they've adapted or the changing conditions of our environment have. But one thing that was written in the 70s that was what they were seeing at the epidemic at that time was that these beetles cannot live above 8,000 feet. Whether that wasn't the case or they certainly hadn't gone there yet, we've been fighting these beetles in Grand County at 12,000 feet, right up to Timberline. They've killed trees. They will not die at 30 below. Fraser, Colorado is a good example. That is in Grand County, Colorado. Its nickname is the icebox of the nation. I recall in the mid-2000s, there were stretches when the worst part of the epidemic was taking place where they had 30 below for weeks on end. And they had no slowing of the beetles. The 30 below really needs to take place in October or May to really have an impact on the brood trees that are carrying the beetles that are reproducing for the following year. And normally we just don't see those temperatures in October or May. Those are the times that the cold temperatures make a difference. If it's in the middle of the winter time, people get excited when they see 30 below. It's not going to make a difference. Do not attack young trees or healthy trees. It's false. Next slide actually shows a picture of that. Do not attack trees above 30 feet. False. What we're saying here is if you have a 100-foot tree like the two earlier trees you saw from Florence, and you're going to protect the bottom 30 feet of that by spraying an insecticide on it, the beetles will hit 40 feet, 50 feet, 60 feet up. And we've seen them in Grand County at 80, 90 feet, and we've certainly seen them at Helena at least 80 feet. So you have to protect the entire tree. You've got to spray as high as mechanically possible in order to give that tree every chance it gets. Secluded to 1 mile radius. That is a fairly false statement in the sense that a lot of people believe that the beetle can float or fly about a mile. They sort of just try to fly in a weird sort of way. But in British Columbia, when you saw that infestation level get over that range, there was an incident up there that they found an area of infestation that was fairly large, several hundred trees that were dying from the mountain pine beetle epidemic or attack. They couldn't find any host trees that they came out of. So they started doing some research, and they found out they had come from the other side of the divide. And the way they got there is when they ran out of the food source up against the mountain range, they decided just to go straight up. They got caught in a jet stream, got carried over 35 miles, dropped into a new environment, and wiped out hundreds of trees. The amount of beetles that went up into that jet stream was so thick and so heavy, it was actually caught on Doppler radar. And with just a little research on the internet, you guys can find that information. It was really interesting. So to say that you're in an environment where you don't see beetles a mile around you and you're safe is just not true. Here is the description of our healthy trees rarely attacked. You can see this large tree, a little bit larger tree. Actually, they're fairly small trees, excuse me. But it's a 25, 30-foot tree. Very healthy, very full canopy. It's out in the middle of a meadow and it's flat, so the water's not running off. It's getting plenty of water. It's got plenty of snowfall. It's up in the mountains of Colorado, and it was just infested to the gills with pine beetles. And you'll see that the whole canopy is turning brown and obviously a dead tree. But you're not going to find a tree that's in an environment that's more healthy than that. Getting a lot of winter moisture, it gets plenty of summer rain. For their environment, gets as much as lodgepole needs. And you'll see that no competition. The closest tree was 20 feet away. So our healthy trees rarely attacked. Just a false statement. So forest management and pine beetle prevention. The next few slides, we're going to talk about identifying the mountain pine beetle, if it's on your property, preventative measures of what you can do to protect your trees today, and how to strengthen your trees. So in the identification process, when we go out to a property and do a survey for an individual, the things that we look for are pitch tubes, sawdusting, browning of canopy, blue stain fungus. We always look at neighboring properties. Here in the Bitterroot, from the surveys that we've been doing for the last few days, there's been some interesting things that we have seen. One of them is that some of the evidence that is what we're looking for today is pitch tubes and sawdusting. A green tree that you and I might not think going by would be infested, but getting up close and taking a close observation, we're going to see these two things, pitch tubes and sawdusting. There's been probably 10% of the trees that we've seen here in the Bitterroot that have been infested that show little to no evidence of pitch tubes and sawdusting. We're going to describe those to you on slides. But the point to that is get a professional on your property early. You know, we've been doing this for a decade, and the only thing that we do is fight the mountain pine beetle epidemic. So when we go onto properties, we're looking for a lot of things, and we're going to be able to find most of these trees that may not look like they have infestation at all. We're going to identify them, and we're going to help make a good program to save the rest of your trees. If you guys wait until that infestation is on your property, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. The best thing to do is start a preventative program before the mountain pine beetle gets to you. So pitch tubes, you'll see on this tree there's some popcorn looking material that happens to be sort of a dark red. which is often seen, and sometimes they're clear white like this. You'll see them one of the two. This particular one, you can see the exit hole, and you can see actually a little bit of sawdust sitting right there in that hole. But that's what you're looking for. In the scale of ponderosa bark, sometimes you'll look deep into that scale before you see some small pitch tubes. So a close watch on that bark and getting in real close to take a good look is very important. Sawdusting. As the beetle bore through the bark, the dust is excavated and can often be found at the base of the tree. And if you look here, you'll just see just a pile of sawdust right at where the tree meets the ground. You can often see it with these ponderosa that has a real thick bark. You'll even notice it on the top of the scale of the bark. So if you're not seeing it on the ground, or if you got snow on the ground, a lot of times I'll blow on the top of that bark to see if I catch any sawdust coming off, and just look in the crevices of the deep bark to find that sawdust. Browning of canopy, of course, is the easiest, but that means that that tree is usually does not have any bugs in it. They've flown out, and it's a year after it's been infested, and it's already long gone. So the blue stain fungus, you can see from the outer part of the bark towards the heartwood of the tree, the blue stain took place right through here. Again, the blue stain is carried. It's a fungus that's carried on the beetle's head. The tree is susceptible to the fungus, and once it takes that fungus on, the fungus spreads through the tree, restricting the water flow, which slowly girdles the tree as well. But without that water flow, the resin pressure that tree is able to produce to try to fight the beetle off by pushing it out with a pitch tube becomes so low, there's little evidence of pitch tubes, and the tree becomes very susceptible to be overcome by the beetle. Property survey. Identifying total number of trees and the species that are on the tree is what we want to do when we get on the property. We want to identify infested trees with a red flagging tape. The next slide will show that. But we'll put a red flagging tape around the tree to identify that there's signs of bark-boring insects in that and mountain pine beetle. We select trees based on budget. If you are going to plan a forestry budget and say, hey, this is what I'm working with, we want to save as many valuable trees as you can on that property and build a proactive strategic plan on what you're going to do over the next 4 to 5 years as this epidemic increases and works its way through the area on how you're going to protect your property. This was the film I was mentioning. We were spraying a property next door here, and the gentleman had asked from this property next door to come over and take a look at his trees. So we walked over, and you can see everything on this corner of his property. He had a few more back here was infested. You'll see the pitch tubes. There's just tons of them on there. I know this in this light it doesn't look real clear, but these were all infested. There's some over in this area that just didn't know that the canopy of the tree was green. It was full of vigor. They looked good. They were freshly infested from the year before. So the year we were spraying, which was last year, you were going to see all these trees turn brown and have to be cut down. So when we talk about protection, we're going to talk about 3 things: pheromone packs, spraying, and microinjections. Pheromone packs. What the pheromone packs do is they actually send out a scent to tell beetles that the tree is fully infested. So when we talk about beetles and beetle pheromones, there's a lot of pheromones in the forest. One being that healthy trees and unhealthy trees are sending out pheromones to begin with. And in a natural environment, in a normal environment, if the epidemic didn't take place, you would notice anything would work, any bugs or any bark-boring insects or anything that was after a tree would tend to try to bore in or do damage to a older, weaker tree. So a pheromone that's being sent out that this tree is stressed normally did get attacked in those environments first. But now that the epidemic and the sheer number of beetles are at epidemic levels, these beetles just go for the food source. So that's a pheromone that's number 1. When the beetles will get onto that tree and they start boring in, they let out a pheromone that says, hey, this hotel is open and they've got plenty of rooms. And that's why you'll see a tree like this get mass attacked. You'll just see hundreds of pitch tubes where this tree was trying to fight off thousands of beetles getting out onto it and trying to eat into it. When the beetles mass attack a tree, the resin pressure of that tree drops to the point where the Beetles then send out another pheromone that says, hey, this hotel has got no vacancy. It's totally infested, there's no more room. And that scent is what is put out by these pheromone packs. And you can see right here, this particular agency put up 2 pheromone packs to try to protect this tree, and it was mass attacked. And the reason for that is that when the sheer number of beetles are so high, they're just going to find that food source. And maybe that pheromone's there, but they're going to land on that tree until they identify for themselves that there's nothing available. They bore in, and as soon as one gets in, they're sending out a pheromone saying, hey, this is a good tree. They notice that resin pressure. So right here it says products on these trees to repel mountain pine beetle. Do not touch, do not remove. And the particular tree was succumbed by pine beetle. In the mid-2000s, we did, Timberline worked with a chemical manufacturer and a gal that was working with CSU on some studies, and we had done some test plots with bifenthrin, permethrin, carbaryl, and pheromone packs in the peak of the epidemic. It was fairly high with the sheer number of beetles being peak, and we found that the packets were around a 30% success rate. So spraying. When spraying a tree with an insecticide, you have 3 products you can choose from: permethrin, bifenthrin, and carbaryl. Permethrins and bifenthrins are similar, and carbaryl has a totally different makeup, but they are certainly the most affordable solution with the highest success rate. When we talk about permethrins and bifenthrins, we use these products for several reasons. One, they're environmentally safer than other pesticides. They're oil-based product which penetrates into the bark of the tree. They won't wash off due to rain or irrigation systems and go into your groundwater. Dries within 1 to 3 hours. Label mixture ratios are 1 to 5 quarts per 100 gallons. 1 quart per 100 gallons is what bifenthrin is the max for pine beetle, and 5 quarts is the max for permethrin for pine beetle. Toxicity level will last for the entire flight of the beetle with 1 application, and this is not a repellent, it's a terminator. So when the beetles actually fly onto the tree, they bore into the bark of the tree, they digest the insecticide, and they fall dead. So it's not pushing them away like what the pheromone pack is doing. It's actually a terminator. Carbaryl is your other option, and there's a few reasons why we don't use carbaryl. In the 1970s, a lot of the applications that were done in Summit County, Breckenridge, Colorado, were done with carbaryl 7, and there's no ability for that chemical to really bond to soil molecules. They leach into the ground fairly quickly, they get into groundwater, and they last a long time. In fact, when you test Breckenridge drinking water today, there are still traces of that chemical in their drinking water from applications that were done in the 70s. And you can see here, a lot of folks have the belief that you can apply this product and it protects for 2 years for mountain pine beetle. And this is just a picture of the label, and it says for effective as a preventative treatment annually to prevent bark beetle. So the only way to apply these products or by the label is the law, it's regulated by the Department of Ag, and in order for this product to fight bark beetle, you're going to be applying it every year. So here's a piece of equipment that we use for spraying of the trees. It's an Isuzu that has an 1,000-gallon water tank on it, and I'd like to describe to you a little bit about what this truck can do. When we pull onto your property, we don't need a lot of access at times, even though we have four-wheel drive trucks to get off the road. But these reels right here go out 400 feet, plus we have extension hoses to really do a wide radius around your house or long distances off your driveway or off the front of your property to where those trees are giving your home the most aesthetic value. The agitation system is really important. This equipment is designed really to apply these products to the best of our ability. And with the agitation, we have pumps here that are moving 40 gallons a minute. And when you're letting off the trigger, it goes through this agitation system to the point where it is really well mixed, so that you don't have any issues of having a solution that has mostly water in one section, mostly chemical in the other. It's an even solution that gets applied onto the tree evenly to give the tree the best protection possible. The pumps are driven by the PTO of the truck to really get maximum height. On a good day, these trucks can spray 100 foot tall. Here's a couple pictures demonstrating that. You'll see this lodgepole in Grand County, and you'll see this ponderosa here in Clancy, Montana. These were actually sort of a similar sized tree. The photo really doesn't indicate that, but you can see the spray getting right up to the very top of the canopy of the tree. And as we work down, we just soak the entire bark of that tree from top to bottom. Here's us spraying in an HOA around a home. You'll notice that you can get up close to the house. This thing dries quickly so that you don't have to worry about any residue being left behind. Permethrins and bifenthrins does not leave any residue, as carbaryl will leave a white, grimy looking residue after an application. When we do applications and we're gone half an hour later, you wouldn't know we were there. Here's a dye test that we did on a lodgepole up in Grand County. And what we did is we just put a dark green dye into the solution. We sprayed the tree, and after about 30 minutes we cut that tree down to see how far that solution worked beyond the phloem of the tree. We just wanted to make sure how much time we had in a hostile environment, whether the rain started coming after an application, making sure before we sprayed the tree bark was dry, to identify how long that process took. Because if application is done on a tree and it rains 2 hours later, we wanted to know with certain confidence that that tree is still well protected. We actually had that dye going in about 30 minutes to that phloem of the tree, and that tree was completely dry on that particular day with those ambient temperatures in well less than an hour, knowing that if a strong rainstorm came through, that we didn't have to worry about that tree's success rate. Here was just a demonstration of a large property. The homeowner here was doing about 500 trees. He asked us to do it quickly. We lined up all our vehicles, and we were in and out of there in about an hour and a half with all of our applicators. A lot of HOAs that are out there don't want to worry about each individual house and what day they're going to be there and having to put toys away or cover their barbecue grill or do whatever they would like to do with their picnic table. So we have an opportunity to say we could be there for 2 to 3 days maybe and get 5,000 trees out of the way. And a lot of people like to have that as a benefit to them so that they can organize a large spray job and we can get in and out of there very quickly. So what makes an effective sprayer? Really building a relationship to protect a large investment. For most people, I know that for me, my home is my largest investment. And when I think about the trees that are on my property and the value that they bring to my home, I want to make sure that if I was going to spray them and spray them well, that they're going to be 100% protected. So things to ask. Chemical. Are they using the full recommended dose? You know, when you use chemical, say permethrin for example, and you have the ability to use 2 quarts per 100 gallons or 5 quarts per 100 gallons, there's no difference in that bark's toxicity the following day after an application, whether you sprayed it with 2 or you sprayed it with 5 quarts per 100 gallons. The difference is longevity. If you're spraying it with 2 quarts, you may only have protection for 2 months, depending on the weather, but with the 5 quarts per 100 gallons, you're going to get the longest coverage possible. You want to make sure you use a full recommended dose. And as far as surfactants go, surfactant is an additive that we put into the chemical solution. It lowers the surface tension of water. If you were ever to spray weeds and you see some of your chemicals sit on top of the waxy leaf surface and not be able to penetrate in, if you put a surfactant in it, it lowers that surface tension of water to allow it to spread out evenly and penetrate into the tree's bark, making sure that we get that chemical again as far into the tree as quickly as possible. Agitation, we spoke about that, making sure your solution is constantly agitated. We always look at the age of the chemical. We buy this chemical by the semi-load, and when these pallets come off, you want to make sure that that product was produced in the year that you're using it. When we're spraying in 2012, that product will be produced in 2012. If you have a chemical manufacturer that says, hey, I can give you a great deal on this stuff, it might have been sitting around for a year or two, it might have froze a couple times, you don't know what that product is like, so you want to make sure you stay away from it. Your success rate could drop quickly because of it. pH levels of your water. We want to know what that pH level is before we put our chemical in to make sure our tank life lasts for the amount of time that we need to. Permethrins and bifenthrins are not as sensitive to pH levels as carbaryl is. Carbaryl being put into a tank of a pH of higher than 8, that chemical solution needs to be sprayed out on a tree within a half an hour, 45 minutes, or may not be good. And spray heights and volume. Make sure that they're spraying as high as mechanically possible, if not to the top of the tree. and that they're saturating that bark, not a light mist, but soaking that bark with the insecticide. And certainly the experience and being ethical, making sure that when you contract to have the 100 tree sprayed, that everything gets sprayed, and the experience of knowing to do it on days that weather conditions allow to have the best applications possible. And last but not least is the micro injections. You'll see these are just a tube of insecticide that is drilled and stuck into the vascular system of the tree. The vascular system will carry it up, and as you can see on this tree, we've got dozens of little pitch tubes here that this tree had already been attacked, and it was an effort to try to clean out anything that was feeding on that tree to give that tree over a 50-50 chance. The one thing that I would strongly recommend that you guys know well is that microinjections need to be applied to a tree that is freshly attacked. 1 to 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, depending on the environment. The sooner the better. If you have a tree that was attacked last year and somebody suggests to you, let's microinject it, I can tell you it's not going to do any good for that tree. You need to catch it as soon as it gets infested. Deep root fertilizing is just a process to strengthen your trees. What we do is, you saw the trucks earlier, we do this spring and fall. We send a liquid fertilizer through these hoses into these rods that go into the ground 2 to 6 inches deep, where a majority of your feeder roots are looking for water, and we fracture that soil because that fertilizer is being sent there under pressure. And once that soil is fractured, you get an aeration to the roots, and you're dumping that liquid fertilizer into that soil to allow that microbial action to break it down and have it available fairly quickly for those roots. So the deep root fertilizing, the way that we do that process is we'll do 16-inch on center injections around the base of the tree, all the way out past the drip line of the tree, 1 to 2 feet. So you can see each one of these dots really represents an injection hole where we're placing 16 to 18 fluid ounces of a liquid fertilizer into the soil to allow the root system to start using that to feed this tree. Some of the advantages of the fertilizing: it really provides nutrients to your trees which may no longer be available to your soils due to construction or competition with other plants, whether the trees are too close together and they're competing for that nutrients, or in the construction process, if you're digging a hole for your foundation of a home or putting your road in, if you have a tarred road that's over 50% of the root system of that tree is really has a battle getting the entire tree fed with only 50% of the root system on one side. Increases color and vigor of your trees, increases growth of young and newly planted trees which are highly susceptible to bark beetle. The fertilizer increases winter hardiness and longevity, increases resistance to insects and diseases, provides aeration to the soil around the target trees, and trees surrounding the target tree also receive nutrients. So if you have a group of aspens and you're selecting 2 or 3 aspens or ponderosa or even blue spruces that you need a few that look like they need help, when we do that injection and we do the base of that tree and we work beyond the drip line of the tree, there's a lot of trees with their root systems that are reaching out that also get a benefit to that tree. This is just a short list of minerals that need to be in the soil, and through that deep root fertilization process, we're replacing that. This was just a photo that demonstrated a tree that we had planted. We had a gal that was from Botswana that stayed with us in 2006, and before she left, she went to Home Depot, got this little tree in a little bucket. It was about 2 feet tall. This picture was taken in 2010, and that tree in 2006 was no higher than my knee, and you can see how well that blue spruce is done being fertilized spring and fall. It really triples and quadruples the growth rate of a tree in this environment. Eradication and mitigation. Eradication is the removal and disposal of infested trees. It's very costly and destructive. You lose a lot of property value, you lose a lot of aesthetic value when you're doing eradication. Mitigation is simply the removal of healthy trees in an effort to thin out an overpopulated forest and create defensible space around your home. When you see a lot of these little pine trees that are bent over and fighting for nutrients, you'll see that those trees are starving for nutrients, and the way to get that healthier forest is to thin out all those small weak trees and get spacing that allows the signature tree that you're trying to get to grow to be healthy. Here was an individual we sprayed, and his friend had this lot next door. We were doing this project. He asked us to take a look at this lot for his friend, and this was in the late 2000s when the epidemic was real bad in their area. We went over, you'll see all the red flagging tape on all this green tree. You'll see this one's browning a little bit, but he had, out of 80 trees, he had about 4 or 5 that weren't infested. Everything else we flagged red and they took out. Just a real good demonstration of knowing that you got to be aware of that the situation is here, it's in this valley, and that you need to do something preventative today before it comes to this. Here's a ranch that we do. We call it the Red Roof Ranch. You'll see all these dark green trees. This was a picture that was taken in 2006. It was actually Google Earth, so its clarity isn't all that great. But you'll see on the west side of this driveway, you'll see all these trees turning brown. This was the Denver Water Board, and they had no plans they had hundreds and hundreds of acres with no plans of protecting those trees. This is County Road 5, and we have a picture coming up taken from this point right here. We can see in 2011, every one of those trees was cut down except for a few little ones that were out by themselves. Thousands of trees taken out. Here was the picture from Route 5 you can see today. With a good preventative spraying program, she was able to save all her trees. Really looked great. This was the fence line between the Denver Water Board and her property. You can see it's got 100% mortality on one side of the fence, and 100% of these trees are alive on the other. Subdivision that we sprayed, just another good picture that demonstrates the effectiveness of this. Here's a lot they chose not to spray. I hope you guys can see it in the light. But you just got a square of dead brown trees next to an environment that's a square of totally green oasis. Just really shows the effectiveness of a good spraying program. 100% alive, 100% dead. So what is a Timberline client advantage? Really professional systems. We handle over 1,300 clients in 3 months, and it takes complex systems to ensure every tree is sprayed and sprayed correctly. It really takes a lot of good protocol to make sure that when we get into these larger projects, that every tree is sprayed like it's spraying our own tree. Our specialization, Timberline's sole mission as a company is to protect your trees. This is the only thing we do. We're not out there planting trees, we're not out there cutting trees, we're out there protecting trees. We have the capability of spraying 4,000 trees per day. The accountability, we have never booked a tree that we haven't been able to spray in the history of this company. And the integrity, we only spray when conditions are right, both in accordance to the Department of Ag and to the highest benefit to you, our customer. The Timberline client advantage, as well as the pesticide, we always use the maximum allowed by the label and always use chemical manufactured in the same year that it is applied. We use specialized equipment, and we utilize the most state-of-the-art equipment to ensure your systems and procedures match the ever-changing habit of the beetle. Experience, we have been saving trees since 2003. Our experience really is our company's greatest asset. We have been doing this for 10 years in a lot of different environments, from high elevation to low elevation, north to south, east to west. We have seen a lot of different epidemics, and every one of those are slightly different. And knowing what you see and what you've seen in the past really gives us a good idea to give information to homeowners like yourself to make good, proactive plans to protect your trees. And having that experience and seeing all those environments is just really critical to making the best plan possible. And the commitment. We are committed 100% customer satisfaction, and we promise to protect every tree like it is our own. Our sole mission is to protect and save your valuable trees from the mountain pine beetle. If we fail in saving your trees, we fail as a company. I thank you guys a lot for taking the opportunity to sit through this. I know looking at it on the website's a little bit long, but we appreciate that. If you guys have any questions, no matter where you guys are in the Rocky Mountain region, if you have any questions about the mountain pine beetle, about mountain pine beetles on your property or in your area, please give us a call or visit us on our website. We're located at www.timberlinespraying.com, and you can reach us at 866-687-6811. That's 866-687-6811 or timberlinespraying.com. Thank you very much.